flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, the first item on the agenda is a presentation of Phase 1 findings. Request of partners.
So what we did for Phase 1 is we took the...
You want to just introduce yourself?
Oh, sorry. I'm Adrienne from Cressa.
Okay.
And basically what we did with Phase 1 is we took the current public record of everything that they have on file for Radnor Township and what they own, and we plotted it out for you and went through and gave you an Excel spreadsheet as well, listed, according to the public record, what the acreage and all of the detailed information that they currently have on file. So there's going to be just some discrepancies, and we know that, and that's stuff that we need to kind of go through in additional phases for you.
I'm Greg Fisher.
You need the mic. You need the mic, I'm sorry.
I'm Greg Fisher with Cressa, and what we can do is we walk through the properties, or we can just answer any questions you might have. This is an ever-evolving map, because properties that we assumed were not owned, we find out through deeds that they are owned. There are some properties, like the middle school property, as an example. You want to speak to that?
Sure. I'm Dick Stanton with Cressa. Throughout the process, we found that there are many issues with record keeping in Delaware County. There are properties that you believe that you own that they don't have a record of you owning. We found deeds that were fully executed and even have book and page numbers on them that there are no records of those being filed in the county. So we will be presenting to you by the end of this project a long list of things that likely your solicitor will need to deal with in terms of getting these records straight. Greg was alluding to the middle school. If I look just at the high-level records of Delaware County, it says that the township owns the middle school. This is in fact not the case. There is a deed in which a portion of it was conveyed to the township, and Commissioner Spengler was nice enough to meet with us and described to us that area is used for parking. But if you look just at the record, the way Delaware County keeps records, a casual observer might think that the township actually owns the middle school. There are several other areas like that, some which are in your favor, some which are not. Cowan Park, for example, there's no record of you owning it at all. And that's something that's going to need to be cleared up. So there are several pieces like that. We will be giving you by the end of the project a detailed listing of what those are and what we would recommend that your solicitor do in order to rectify those situations.
John, you had mentioned, I don't think we own the tennis courts. I saw your email. You said we own the tennis courts at the middle school?
As long as I was on Parks Board, the tennis courts were always township. And then we gave them to the school district to use during construction of the middle school as a laydown area. And the agreement was they would restore them at the end of that. So that may not have been correct, but that was my understanding during that period of time.
I mean, my only recollection of the middle school is that we have those parking across from St. Mary's where we give permits out. So we own that somehow, that we can give out permits and collect money for that area. So that's my only recollection.
Mm-hmm.
I did have some recollection that we might have owned the tennis courts, but I mentioned it to you, and you said we don't own the tennis courts.
Well, according to the county records, that you don't.
Yeah.
However, you may do some digging and find a deed in your files that we haven't come across yet that gives you title to them. That's not properly recorded.
We actually had our those old. Remember the wooden signs we used to have that they did at the shop?
Yeah.
They were up there for that tennis court.
Yeah.
I'll give you another example. We found a deed in your files for an address of 108 Station Place or Station Road. The way you search records in Delaware County, if you only have the address, you pull up Radnor Township and it populates a pull-down list of street names. Mm-hmm. Station Road is not a valid street name. This property does not exist in the county.
Yeah.
I actually found the property. It's the senior center by the train station.
Yeah.
Right.
So there are a lot of things where you may own something, but they don't have a record
Well,
of it.
are you going to check with the school district about the tennis courts?
Well, we'll
See
have to
what-
look for the deeds for them.
Well, but they might have a deed or some recollection where the township gave it to them.
Yes,
They might have some record on that.
and we can certainly do that.
All right.
Yeah, I gave you a list of about 6 or 7 things.
And some of those items, sir, we already had the answers to. And we've been working on this,
Yeah, and then
nonstop.
I responded also again because.
And John, I
Yes.
forgot about Odorisio Park. I just
Yeah, how
seen
about
the-
Odorisio? Did
Yeah.
you see the deed for that?
Yes, Odorisio Park, that's the 60/40 one? The township owns 60% of that, and the school district owns about 40%.
Is that from
of
county
it.
records or from the deed?
From both.
The deed says
Yes,
that?
I did see a deed. I didn't go through and analyze the meets and bounds description because I'm not a surveyor, but the deed did mention both entities on it.
But,
And the county records that clearly
But-
show a delineation between the two.
but they own the ball fields and we own the woods? I thought they own the woods and we own the ball field.
We haven't gone through the detailed meets and bounds description of it to be able to separate that out.
Okay.
But
Because they maintain the ball fields.
And we maintain the ball
We
field.
do.
the township maintains the ball fields. Number 3 on the chart there, the very large one, where she's pointing the cursor, the white box above it is the 40% that the school district owns.
Yeah.
So you have access on the 2 roads, and that portion
Yeah.
there with the 3 on it.
But I always thought the school district owned the 3 because, I mean, we put the ball field in, we put the basketball courts in, we put the thing in. There was never any discussion about the school district owning the property.
Yeah.
So there seem to be a lot of instances where school district owns property and you guys maintain it.
All right. Well, and you'll check with the school district about Odorisio Park also to get their clarification on what they think?
Yes, I'd be happy to.
All right. And then the one on Garrett is easy. We just own the front, the school district owns the rest.
That's correct.
And we bought that just a few years, about 10, 12
Not
years
even.
ago.
Yes.
Yeah, not
10
even.
years, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So this is all under Phase 1 of the project, just identifying the parcels,
Right.
seeking out all documentation that you can find. And you're still in that process at this point, it sounds like, maybe
Well,
just clearing up some
right,
issues.
the list is ever-changing based on information we dig up in deeds at the county's office.
So,
But we're-
just so I understand because it's been a little while since I looked at the scope of services and what the phases were going to be, but is this just an interim update of where you are, or you completed Phase 1 at this point?
Well, since there are some issues related to some of the properties, we're going to
Okay.
continue to straighten those
Okay,
out.
so with some
But-
new information that you've gotten over the last day or two
Right.
from us, you're going to go back,
We'll
look at this? Yes.
We'll be continually updating things. Phase 1 is complete, but there's new information that comes to light, so we'll go back and update those results. And at the end of the project, we'll give you a full comprehensive report.
Okay.
But the records are so bad at the county level that, what we've given you is as comprehensive as we can give you at this point.
I see. And Bob, maybe Bob can answer this. Did we approve Phase 2 and the evaluations of the properties as well?
Yes.
And is that expected to commence as soon as you're done
It's-
resolving these issues?
We've already commenced Phase
Phase
2,
two,
because
okay.
the process was Phase 1, identify the properties that you own.
Right.
Phase 2 is identify, the functions that are on those properties, whether it's just a wooded area, whether there's access, whether there's parking lots, whether there's ball fields, how it's used. And Phase 3 is an assessment of the use and what else could be used, and what is the optimal and best use for the property. But we are heavily involved in Phase 2.
Okay.
Can I just clarify?
Yeah, they're just having a problem hearing. Maybe speak just a little louder. Thank you.
Are you done?
Yes.
So can you just clarify how the discrepancies are going to be handled? So you're going to identify that there's this discrepancy, you're going to show, we found this in the deed, that in the county record, and then it comes back to us, and it's up to us to get our solicitor to take it from there? Is that how it would work?
As an example, there are 2 properties that we identified a folio number. One happens to be 28 acres, and one happens to be 10.5 acres, somewhere around there. And the folio would indicate they are somewhere in and or around the high school, but not on high school property. But we cannot identify where they are, and we've asked the county to provide us more information on exactly where those properties are. And we've asked, right? Yeah.
The reason we can't identify where they are is the county records show that you own a parcel. It lists the street that it's on, lists the size of it, but it doesn't give a map of where it is, nor does it have any reference to any deed. So based on that, we've provided a detailed letter to the county assessor asking him several questions probably about a month ago, and I believe that you actually ratified or gave a resolution to him asking him to do that. We've as yet received no response. We've managed to resolve a few of those issues on our own, and tomorrow I'm going to provide Mr. Zinkowski with an updated list, and he was nice enough to say he would go back to the assessor's office and say, okay, here's what they really need now, please finish it.
So in the phase one that you're doing, would that include going, for the properties that are confused with the school district, would that include going to the school district? Would that be your task to go to the school district and ask them to pull their records, or is that going to come back to us?
We will go to them and see if they have any records that would firm things up. We have found many of the deeds, for example, the nature park. In that area where the elementary school and the nature park are, there was several transactions over the course of several decades in which land was conveyed between the two entities and also the Radnor Township Municipal Authority. You tell us that you own the nature park, yet we can find no record of a specific piece over there identifying the nature park as separate from anything else. What we have ascertained is that you quite likely own about 3 acres according to some deeds that we've seen, and that's about the size of the nature park, so it makes sense. But we need the assessor's office to confirm exactly the coordinates of those. So to answer your earlier question, will we be giving it all to your solicitor? No, we'll figure out some of it on our own during the course of phase 2 and 3. Some of it we will say, this is a problem that only the solicitor can resolve, but other issues we've already come up with answers for along the way and have incorporated them into this report. So as we find them, we're digging through decades worth, and the county had split their system in the early 80s, and there's really no link between the two of them. The older system doesn't have any information regarding folio numbers at all, so many of the legal descriptions in there don't even mention roads. They use the railroad and land owned by people who are long since deceased as points of reference, and it's virtually impossible to tell where these pieces are. But we have been going through and identifying everything, and we've been able to dig up a lot of things that have shed a lot of light on these issues, and the questions for the assessor really are the last batch. The information for the solicitor will really not be to find things out, but to correct problems. We will give him the information that he needs to go and say, okay.
Do new deeds and file
right,
them
exactly.
and file the right paperwork.
Ideally, when a piece of land is sold, when a portion of a piece of land is sold, a new folio number should be issued, but that's not the practice in Delaware County.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes.
I think this demonstrates the real value of what we're trying to do here, and this is something that I believe back in 2010, I think CBFAC recommended that we need to do this, so this was recognized by them that this is a problem. And it would seem to be that it should be very easy to be able to go and find what real estate the township owns. But I think what we're going through right now is going to pay a huge dividend for the township to actually know what we own and what we have. So I think, to the board's credit here that, to be able to enlist this and take that recommendation of the real true value that's there. And I think from the CBFAC group, I think they should be recognized for that and spotting that. And I think this is being demonstrated, the real need that has to be done.
Any other questions?
Do you guys have an opinion as to how sort of all these disconnects happened? I mean, it's not very comforting to sitting here and hearing the county doesn't know what's going on, the township doesn't know what's going on, the school district doesn't know what's going on.
Well, it goes back largely to processes and how the county's assessor's office and recorder of deeds office have been handling things for the last 80 years. When your process does not require you to generate a new parcel number, if a portion of a piece is sold off, it's very difficult to keep track of who owns what. So, for instance, let me think of a good one.
Well, the issue is that normally these things are found out when you go to sell your property.
Yes.
Most properties turn over within 80 years. They've turned over. The problem is the township gets a property. If it's not recorded properly, not done properly, the township knows it's their property, and no one's challenging that use, and the township isn't selling it. If the township went to go sell a property, then they would have to prove that they owned it for the title company.
And in some cases, that would be difficult work for the title company.
Yeah.
And then there were, transactions, as I said, over the years, multiple transactions between the township and the school district, the township and this, which I believe may now be defunct, Radnor Township Municipal Authority.
Yeah.
So that all complicated the thing, because when you're dealing with the municipal authority, you're dealing with multiple parcels and multiple areas on one deed. And so those details at the county level, especially when they were done prior to 1982, became very muddled. And you would see, the records refer you to a book and page number in the new system where you've got 7 parcels spread throughout the township on one book and page number, and then you go look at the deed and it really doesn't give you any information as to where any of this is. So we've been muddling through it and been quite successful at it, but largely the issues reside at the county as to why you're seeing these problems.
The issue is poor practices on their part.
It's not ideal processes and procedures. In Montgomery County, if you were to do a subdivision such as that, you would walk in, before it's even recorded, you would have to go into the assessor's office and they would assign you a new parcel number to take with you to the recorder of deeds. That does not happen in Delaware County.
And because they're not taxable, they didn't care about a folio number.
And that's
So
another
they
point,
just,
certainly.
Well, it's not taxable, we don't need a folio number, so they just didn't do it.
Correct.
So then, in that instance, we can take additional steps on our end to make sure that we document by having, good, defined deeds.
Well, I think you would
Explain.
demand a new folio number for any situation in which you were involved
Okay.
going forward.
Were there instances where we failed to record our deeds where we should have, or maybe we just didn't think we needed to, or?
No, you would always need to. I mean, the recording at the county solidifies the ownership. I have not come across, or we haven't come across any instances where you haven't recorded a deed, but we have come across instances where deeds have been recorded and aren't actually reflected in the county's online systems.
And that's because they had transferred the old paper system into the digital system?
No, I don't
or-
believe that's it at all. The old paper system is all digitized, but there's across the street from Cowan Park, there is a parking lot, and it was deeded from Delaware, some Delaware County Economic Development Organization, I don't remember the specific name off the top of my head, to the township.
Industrial Development Authority.
Okay, from the Industrial Development Authority, thank you. And you have a deed that has a book and page number stamped on it in your files, but that, if you go to the county records, they do not have your ownership of this parking lot reflected.
But in the last 80 years, there have been a lot of instances of this, and the title company is the one that suffers. When you go to sell your property, they have to go and research it and come up with this and straighten it out and tell you, you got to get your lawyer, or you got to do this, or you got to do that, you got to pay for this, you got to pay for a survey to get this done. So when the county has screwed up in the past on many, many properties, not just township properties, it's the title company. When you go to sell it, it has to give good marketable title, it has to straighten it out.
Well, that's true. It takes a lot of effort on their part, but in the meantime...
I sold a house across from Cabrini College, and it was 1 acre. And the county record said 1 acre, everything said 1 acre. But 15 years ago, when they bought it, they sold 1 acre to the guy, a quarter acre to the guy next door. The title company never recorded it. It cost the title company $20,000. Because the guy was only buying 3/4 an acre. It wasn't an acre. Because the guy sold it off and the county or somebody
Yes.
didn't do their job. So
And-
it happens frequently.
And the other issue is liability. I mean, if there is land that they're saying that you own, that you don't actually own, and someone gets hurt on it and wants to go sue someone, they're going to come after you potentially. But if you don't actually own it, you shouldn't have records that say that you do.
Yeah, okay.
So you're going to give us a set of guidance for John Rice to go down and fix this. How do we make sure it gets fixed?
I think you'd have to put your faith in your solicitor.
But how does he follow up to make sure these records, do you guys do a check at the end of the process again?
We could, certainly.
We can just not pay Cressa their final check until they do.
Well, the thing is that if you get a folio number and you get an ID number, then they'll record it in their system, and you can go on the computer, public records, and do that folio number, and it'll come up. There it is, you know?
Yes.
Well, my concern is I don't want to be sitting here hearing this conversation 2-3 years from now that it's not fixed,
2-3 years from now.
based on the fact of how many years it's
Yeah,
going.
yeah.
You also have an issue. You also have an issue on some properties, and Chew tract is an example, and the Young tract is an example. If you go into the county records, it says 7.75 acres, a Chew lot. When you go into the deed,
It was 10.5.
10.5 acres.
Yeah.
And the Young lot, Young tract is a half an acre. And you see what appears to be a lot more
Yeah.
space than that. So those
What
are,
happened in that
those
scenario?
records, pardon?
What happened in that scenario? It was just a transcription error?
I don't know. Do you?
We don't know. We did research every transaction in which you were the grantor of land, since 1982 in the new system,
Yeah.
and didn't see anything where you gave up any of this. So we don't know why.
No, we got that in the 90s. We had to go, the guy that owned that property, we went to court and
Right.
got it somehow.
Right, and you had explained that to us, sir, and the records that we find show a very small corner of that
Yeah.
rather than the entire piece that you described.
And for that one, did you see the deed?
Yes,
And the deed describes the larger parcel?
yes,
Yeah.
So that's just an error at the county level.
yes.
But the county has 10 acres.
On one piece, but on the other piece next to it, it describes PennDOT as the owner of a good portion of it.
That's a
Oh,
Young
for
tract.
Chew.
Yeah,
Young.
okay.
I have one more question about the, on your Section 3 chart, you have a column here, implied value, after assessment value.
Yes.
Can you explain what that is?
The implied value is the assessed value times the common level ratio, which is the ratio provided by the state to each county based on their method of assessment that's supposed to bring the market value of the property up to date based on the assessment level. All properties are assessed at one time in a given county as of a certain date. So over time, that assessed value, when they do it, that assessed value should be the market value, but over time that changes. So the state creates what's called a common level ratio, and you multiply that by...
What's the common, what's it now, 60-some%?
I believe it's either 62.5 or 67.5%.
I mean, to explain it simply, when I became a county commissioner, common ratio was 23%. If you went to court, they took 23% of your appraised value, and that's what the assessment of your property should be. When I left county government, it's 2.3%, because property values go up and assessment stays the same. So every time you sell properties,
Yes.
the common ratio comes down, and the percentage, if you go to court, comes down.
Yes.
Okay. And so we went 100% in 2000, supposedly, but now with all these sales, compared to what their assessments are, it's now 60-some%. What was 60? 67%
I can
of
tell you
market
exactly
value.
if you need to know.
Yeah. And that'll continue to change as property values either go up or down.
Yes.
So that's not any kind of a reflection of your opinion of market value?
No, ma'am.
And that's the third thing we agreed to do, is what is the market, what is our opinion of value based on the current market? And we'll be going through that in phase 3.
Okay.
Any other questions?
One last one. You have a lot of ones here for price, and I suspect most of them are, we don't know the price. But
Actually-
there's no distinction between those that we don't know and those that have a nominal price.
Actually, most of them are accurate. The only ones that would not be are the ones where you see a 9999, 9999 is the book and page number, because they came out of the old system and we've not yet found anything. Actually, this morning in researching some old deeds, I was able to put numbers on some more of those, but that is something that we can certainly delineate in the final report.
For example, it says the Willows, $1. Did we get the Willows for $1?
1.2 million.
Yes, the Willows, actually, I found the deed in the old system just this afternoon and put a number on that, but you took that by condemnation.
Yeah, you can record it as $1 if you don't want the public to know what it is, the value. The seller might request that it be recorded as $1 so the public
Actually, that
doesn't
was
know
a
what he
case
sold
of old system versus new, because I did find the deed with the amount on it today. So I have that amount. You took it by condemnation when you purchased it.
And then we've sold properties for $1.2 million, but we only paid them $900,000, and they donated $300,000 to the township to get a tax break. So
We're trying to
there's all
get this
kinds of
right.
different
Let's get it
things.
right. Not some artifact that's some negotiated
No, that's a
disclosure.
great suggestion. We'll be happy to incorporate that into the spreadsheet.
All right. Does the public have any questions or comment? Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time and effort, and continue the good work.
Thank you.
Oh, and on the Chu and Young property,
Yes.
Clint Stenenbach, former commissioner. If you get his number, he would know a lot more than I do.
Okay.
About how we, because it was a legal matter, and we, fought to get that property, so he would have a better handle on it than I did.
Okay. Thank you.
Next is a presentation regarding Township Tree Maintenance Replacement Program.
Thank you, Commissioner Spengler. Just want to step through this. I know we have a lot to cover tonight. This is concerning tree maintenance and replacement within the township right-of-way on streets in Radnor Township. Section 263-9, street trees. Maintenance of street trees comes directly from our shade tree ordinance. The cost and expense of planting, pruning, maintaining, feeding, protecting, and caring for street trees shall be borne by the township when and only when the work is done by the township. So to paraphrase, this is saying we should only be responsible for maintaining trees planted by the township. Historically, up to this date, in reality, we maintain and or will remove trees within the township right-of-way, whether we know that they have been planted by the township or not. And I don't know how far back our records can go, but I can tell you as a young man on Yorkshire Road, I know the township came through and planted trees up and down our street, and I haven't found records to that effect. So basically, if it's in the township right-of-way and we get a call on it, we will address it. Shade tree planting. This is the big tree planting project done in conjunction with Chanticleer and the Radnor Conservancy. And basically, the Radnor Conservancy, a representative, took the list of the trees we have removed from the township right-of-way over the last few years, sent letters out to those folks to see if they would want a replacement tree, and for a small fee, they would get a tree that would be planted through that project. 2012 to date, this is in-house, and actually this is of about June, it hasn't been updated. We have spent close to 400 man-hours on maintaining trees in the right-of-way with our own forces. That's nobody else. I would hazard a guess that by the end of the year, that'll be close to about 1,000 hours, so about a half full-time equivalent spent on maintaining trees in-house. 2010 and 2011 tree planting, 25 trees were planted, 6 trees were replaced in the Wayne Business District. We've had these contracts, the tree and stump removal contract. The Board of Commissioners was gracious enough to let us go out to bid again this year for that. In 2009, that was approximately $24,229. In 2010, apparently there was no contract. And last year we spent over $44,000. On the upcoming contract, I would expect that we will spend at least $44,000, with about 60% of that amount being for trees on the trail and in parks that need to be removed or pruned. With our current staffing right now, we are reactive regarding trees within the right-of-way. We don't have a tree crew. It's actually our parks crew which goes out and maintains trees to the best of our ability. If we can't do it and it's of an urgent nature, we will call a contractor to come in. If it can wait, it goes on that contract that the board just let us go to bid for. So the current staffing and equipment levels do not support a proactive approach. We have options with the program. We could continue the use of an in-house and contracted services to maintain trees within the right-of-way, or we could perform all work in-house. And when I say perform all work, again, we are not proactive. We respond to calls for trees. The reality of it is we could be going down all the Radnor streets for years and removing and pruning trees, opening up the canopy for better movement of motorists. If we were to go to something like that, the equipment is a little bit over $250,000, and it would include 3 additional people, one being an arborist. Now, the final option, which is not noted on there, is that we could not maintain trees within the right-of-way. And for this upcoming budget, these are the options we're looking at in making our request to the board. And that will conclude the tree presentation.
Well, in the 70s and 80s, we planted like 5 trees, street trees. And then we got a debate in the early 90s, and we decided maintenance was very important, but planting was also important. So at that time, in the early 90s, we decided that we had to maintain these trees because they were hazards. People driving their cars, you know, I have a personal relative that, you know, was driving on River Drive, and a tree fell down and killed him. And so hazardous trees along the right-of-way are very dangerous to motorists if they're not taken care of. When I was driving on Edge Hill Road, I saw 3 or 4 trees marked there, X's. I guess the township's going to take those trees down. And I think the township has to find a way to continue to maintain the trees along the right-of-way, especially the hazardous ones, you know, that we have a program to remove them. And then in the 90s, up until 4 years ago, we planted 1,500 trees. We planted 40 every spring and 40 every fall for a number of years. And when the crunch hit in 2008, and we stopped that program, we don't do the street trees. We have the big tree program now. But I don't know how the other commissioners feel, but I think that we have to continue to maintain maintenance on the trees in the right-of-way because it's a hazardous to motorists and pedestrians. And we can't let the property, you know, I mean, I guess you could get the property owner, just go put them on, go and say, take this tree down. But again, it could be $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 to take a tree down. And, you know, we're going to have to constantly be fighting. And I think it's good environmentally and safety if we maintain the trees that are in the right-of-way, and when the diseased ones, that we take them down. And as our budget permits, we plant as many trees as we can to replace them for the next generation.
And that's a continuation of existing policy, correct?
Yes, yes.
Very good.
Well, I have first a question, and then I have something to say about this. My question is, the numbers that you've shown tonight and the numbers that are in our budget that under the shade tree program, are those only the right-of-way tree work, or does that encompass the work we do on trees within our parks as well?
The contract, tree removal and stump grinding, that encompasses both, so that money goes for both. Like I say, this year, probably 60% of what's out there is on the Radnor Trail. We had an independent arborist come through, and if you see an X on a tree, that's remove, and if there's an arrow on the tree pointing up, it means it's going to be pruned. But I agree with the board. I think we have to. We don't have a trained staff from an arborist standpoint. So if there's usually a question as to whether a tree is safe or not, it's going to come down. I think we need to have the ability to replace as many trees as we can going forward, not just removing what we have.
All right, so this is where I stand on this. This is something I feel really strongly about, as many people know. And, you know, we're in a spot now in our township where we're replacing or facing replacement of a lot of our infrastructure because we've been here 100 years, things are crumbling, and things don't last forever. Well, our tree canopy is the same way, and our tree canopy is dying off. You know, we were developed 100 years ago, and trees have lifespans, and we are losing significantly more trees than we are able to plant. And the trees that we have are old and diseased and need maintenance. So in my opinion, I don't think a reactive approach is appropriate going forward. I think we need to start to be proactive and take more responsibility for this infrastructure. This really is a type of infrastructure. And it's important to maintain our healthy tree canopy and our horticulture for many reasons. Number one, for liability, as Bill pointed to. You know, it's not theoretical that a tree can hit someone and kill them. It happened this year in Radnor. That's not just theory. And so liability number one. Number two, having healthy trees and small wooded areas and small forests is integral to a municipality's management of their stormwater. We know that, and we're moving towards a stormwater management program that's going to incorporate that. So we need to be thinking that way as we treat our tree canopy going forward. It also has, a healthy tree canopy has other benefits environmentally with, clean water and clean air. And finally, you can't overlook the economic value that trees, a healthy tree canopy and trees on streets and trees in parks bring aesthetically, and the value that brings to your township and your neighborhood and your property. So in my opinion, we are not meeting our obligation in our tree program. And the money that we spend over the years has been, from 15,000 to 60. What we spend is actually more than what you put on this. That was the contract numbers. The numbers are more, 2009 was only 13, 2010 was 9,000. Last year it was 68.5. This 2012, this year we had budgeted 65. I'm sure that includes other things like planting and arborist consulting. And we also have the benefit of our nonprofits, the Radnor Conservancy and the Chanticleer, adding money into that, paying for some of these things. But in my opinion, the program we have is not serving us well enough in protecting this important infrastructure for the future. I think we need an arborist. I don't think we can afford a full-time arborist. I'm not advocating for that, but I do think we can afford a part-time arborist, because not only can that arborist take control of the program we have and give it some more purpose in terms of replanting and in terms of maintenance, they can also do a better job of enforcing our shade tree ordinance, which goes a long way in protecting the tree cover that we have now, and when it comes down, replacing it. But we just don't have the enforcement. We don't have anybody on staff dedicated to enforce that, and it doesn't get enforced. And that's been a problem for years and years. A part-time arborist would go a long way in helping us. So something that I'd like to see happen, and I'm going to advocate for as we move forward, is hiring a part-time arborist. It sounds like we're already spending a lot of man hours on, 1,000 man hours a year is a lot of time. If we need to increase that, I think the arborist will go a long way in making that time efficient and planning so that we're not just reacting, we're being proactive. So that is my opinion on this, and I will continue to advocate for an arborist.
I also support the idea of a part-time arborist, but I think the crux of this is it is an infrastructure issue, and much like we are finally developing long-range plans that address other infrastructure issues, this should be on that list. This is something that needs to be managed. Steve, how many significant trees have we lost this past year in our parks? I know Willows has been a bloodbath.
Going on this year's contract, I'll go back, I think we have some 60-odd trees to be removed under this contract, and close to 30 are on the trail and in our parks. And last year with the storms, we lost dozens in the parks. And going to Commissioner Shaver's point with a professional arborist, again, we don't have the training. So if a resident calls and says this tree is unsafe, if it seems evident to our folks, we're going to remove it. But if we had an arborist that we could go to, that person may say, this tree is fine. Maybe it needs to be pruned. Maybe it has a disease. But really, our approach at this point is all or nothing, other than doing some pruning of dead wood. So there's other benefits to having a professional arborist on retainer, on hand, or to be able to be used.
Thanks.
Steve, why can't we just have a contract with an arborist?
And that is a valid way, similar to we have a consulting contract with an engineering firm.
Right.
And some of that, this was actually brought up by Shade Tree because we had conflicting arborist reports on a tree to come down, a heritage tree to come down. And to use an independent arborist is really the way to go at that point. You know, most of the tree, I mean, all the tree people in the township that do tree work are arborists, but they're also business folks. So they're going out to look at a tree. The independent arborist does not remove trees anymore. That person got training that way, but they're looking at it specifically, you know, X's and O's. Is this tree, should it come down? So that's a perfectly adequate way also of dealing with it, just like we have our contract engineer.
So my thoughts, I agree with Bill. We should maintain the responsibility of ensuring that the right-of-way is safe. Before we conclude the impact that these trees will have on stormwater, I think we have to make the distinction between flooding and other aspects of stormwater management. I think everyone can agree that there's a benefit on stormwater management, but I don't think we're going to see the benefit from, I don't think we're going to see the flooding benefit. I don't think we're going to see the relief from flooding that some people think. So that's something that should be quantified. I'm also not sure that the trouble with our canopy is due to the age of our community. I think that the trouble with the canopy is largely due to the saldo process. So my sense is that the key to new trees is in the saldo process, and specifically with some kind of modest multiplier on the process that essentially builds a sort of a bank of trees. So that's it. And then I did have one question. Steve, currently when we have a tree cut down, it sounds like we go to the organization that would cut the tree down and ask them for an opinion regarding the safety of the tree.
Well, I guess if it started with a resident who called in and said there was an unsafe tree by my bus stop, one or two of our guys who have some basic knowledge of tree work would go out and assess it with the ability they have. And if it seemed very clear that the tree was dead or causing a hazard, we would remove it. If it was beyond our ability and we thought danger was imminent, we would call a tree contractor to come in. Now, the other item was when Shade Tree gets, Sue Jones, it comes through engineering, we get calls from residents to say, I need to take down a tree, and it's a heritage tree, so they have to go to Shade Tree. And they oftentimes will get a letter from their arborist which says, this tree is a hazard and should come down. And that goes to Shade Tree. And what Shade Tree had asked us was, if we had an independent arborist, we could have that person, him or her, go out and confirm that that shade tree, that heritage tree, which we're not going to get back. It's a 36-inch tree. You can plant all the 2.5-inch caliper trees you want. We're not getting that back for, long, long time. To verify that that tree does need to come down, or maybe it could be pruned. Is it imminent? Does it have to come down this instant? So there's a lot of uses for that, but that's the process. It either starts with a resident coming to Public Works or a resident whose arborist knows the process and went to Shade Tree Commission.
Steve, I'm sorry, are you finished? Steve, I just have a few questions. In order for me to make a decision whether to keep it in-house or a blend of outsourcing and in-house or go full in-house, I think I need a better sense of the true costs. I heard some numbers that the outsource costs that we had spent over the past couple of years varied widely by year. If we could get a good sense of what it would cost per year outsourcing to maintain to do what we're doing now, which is reactive, versus a more proactive maintenance schedule, and what that cost would be, versus doing it in-house. And the in-house, I think we need a little more information. You have the equipment cost of $260,000. I assume that's the first time buy of the equipment, replacement schedule. What's the cost per year for both capital and for the personnel costs? We have 3 additional employees, one being an arborist. Is there a chance that the resources exist within house if they're trained? Or do we need to hire 3 new persons, one being an arborist? And what's the actual cost of that per year? And maybe come up with a 5-year plan, and I don't think it needs to be a lot of computation here, but just kind of a quick back of the envelope even. And when I look at this, I'm looking at somewhere around maybe $200,000 to $250,000 a year in salary costs. And then if you took the equipment costs, amortized it over 5 years, you're looking at maybe $50,000 per year for equipment costs. But again, there's too many. I think first to make a good decision here.
Commissioner, if I may, just on the
Yes.
back of the envelope,
Yes.
working with Bill on this, personnel costs would be about $339,000 per year. If you amortize the equipment over 10 years, it's about $26,000. And then if you look at what we do in contracted services, you're around $430,000 a year, which breaks down to about 6,200 hours on a contracted basis. So I think when you look at that and then you look at liability issues, workman's comp issues in that, of how you want to be able to do that and maintain that over a program, those numbers I think are going to tell a lot.
So are you going to come back to us at a later date to give us this
Yes.
advice?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm getting ahead of the card.
But that was that. But I think maybe what you're looking for is a bit
right.
back of the envelope. That was some
But-
quick numbers
and
based on that.
Again, we don't, just to get a sense, so I'll just finish up by saying I do support a tree maintenance program. I think it's important, but I support it if we can find the right mix of outsourcing and insourcing that makes sense and keeps risk down for us and keeps costs down, but also gets the work done. So whatever we can do.
And there's other options in the outsourcing. We have an emergency sewer contractor. I mean, we could always look at basically going out to bid for an annual contract for like an Asplund type company that we would call all the time, and we have set prices. I mean, there's pitfalls with that, but there are other options. Like I say, this was a general overview to say, here's what we have, here's what we're doing, here are some options. And as the budget moves forward, we will tighten things up and make proposals.
But
Thank you.
the one thing we learned over the years is that it's going to be cheaper for us to take trees down if we bid them out rather than develop staff, because then we got pensions and all this overhead. So we're moving in the other direction to try and reduce staff. So in this, to add staff to do this, because, I mean, we've done it well over the last 20 years, where we've taken down these trees and we planted 1,500 trees. And, I mean, the economy's been bad, but we've done that all, well, the township has planted the trees. Most of the trees, the township planted them. But taking them down and all, we have had a good program of taking these trees down and done a good job over the last 20 years.
Maybe if I can just add, and I think goes back to Commissioner Schaefer's point, is this is a program that's long overdue to be on the proactive side, which again I think will continue to keep the health of the trees up to where they are. But I think right now, jumping into this program now is we're probably a good 10 years behind schedule of where we need to be. Because again, not only are we looking at the health of the trees, but also there are a lot of right-of-way issues. There are a lot of sightline issues and that we just need to get caught up on. So I think there's got to be a commitment of, if we're going to go to this program, there's going to be some expense. But I think when looking at how these costs can go and liability issues, and I think Commissioner Spengler, you just spoke about some of the other liability issues,
But-
to look at of where we have to go.
The other thing we have to do is that, in the 60s, we planted locust trees on Marsh Road and Sugartown Road, and we planted ash trees on Longwood Drive. There's none left. There's not one left because we tried to put them in between the sidewalk and curb. In the 90s, I ran cherry trees down Marsh Road, and now they're getting big and they're really strangled there. And we really ought to, and I've done this on a couple occasions and broke the rules and planted the tree out of the right-of-way on the person's property. And we ought to look at our rules, and if we're going to have these shade trees, especially when the sidewalk, between the sidewalk and the curb is a small area, we ought to encourage some way to get them on the other side of the sidewalk. Because, we're just going to keep replanting these trees, and they're going to keep dying, they're going to keep pushing up sidewalks. And so, I know we plant trees in a right-of-way, and we don't plant them on private property, but we ought to come up with a system where we can plant them on private property, out of the right-of-way, if that's the best place to put the tree for the long health of the tree and for the shade tree, and find a way to do that. I mean, I've done that, where you just couldn't fit the tree in, and so we just put it on private property right over there, which we shouldn't, probably shouldn't have done and use township staff to do and all that, but we ought to find a way to do that because that's the best way. We're going to spend a lot of money in the next 20 years planting trees. We ought to plant them where they're going to be there, 40, 50 years from now.
That perfectly underscores why an arborist who's committed to our township, knows what's suffering, what needs to be replenished, knows what this landscape's going to look like in 50 years, can make a considered and thoughtful plan of what to maintain, how to maintain, what to plant, where to plant it. And it doesn't have to be a staff person. It can be a consultant. But it has to be someone who is committed and that we give them enough time to really do a good job of organizing our tree program, because it's not very organized.
I think just to add to your point too, to be able to support our different boards and commissions like the Shade Tree Commission, because again, a lot of times they need the support of a professional arborist to make those determinations. Since we are taking more of an aggressive approach for trees that are being taken down improperly, and I know Steve has been at those meetings with Kevin too, I think it will definitely lend that support and that expertise that the township desperately needs.
Well, in the 90s and the thousands, we had the Shade Tree Commission went out and looked at trees. They're the ones that recommended the plantings. They oversaw the whole thing. John Ward was there, and Chris Woods was there, and from Chanticleer, and they always took a proactive role, and they go out and look and tell us whether we could take a tree down or not. And they came up with the tree planting. They approved the tree planting scheme and they ran it in the 90s. But it's, the last 4 years we've had no money, so we discontinued the tree planting program in the streets. 40 trees in the spring and 40 in the fall, which we did for 15 years. But we did keep up with the maintenance. We took the trees down where people called and complained, and we went by and looked at them and took an X down. But one of the best programs the township had over the last 20 years is if someone had a dead tree in front of their house, all they did was call the township. The township came and looked at it, put an X on it, and took it down in a year or two. So it was a good program.
It's not that we've completely not had planting. Since 2009, the Big Tree Program has put in over 70 trees. Then just last spring, we put in over 100 trees at Clem-Macrone with the Tree Vitalize grant. So they are going in. It's just not what it could be.
Yeah.
Well, Bob and Steve, I'm going to need to understand better what you mean by proactive, because I don't need it tonight, but I know on my yard this year I spent $7,000 on pruning trees. And my yard is nothing compared to the size of the township. So when I look at you selling me proactive planning and proactive maintenance, that says to me a lot of money.
Well, proactive really goes along a lot of levels, from along what Commissioner Schaefer had brought up. You just noted 3 different programs that planted 3 different sets of trees throughout the township. So everybody was working not in a vacuum, but in different ways. So proactive in where should we plant these trees, a general consensus of what types of trees, where they should go. But also, again, on the maintenance, yes, I just had a tree taken down at my house, and nobody likes those bills.
Well, some of the trees I maintained on my property were in the township right away, so should I send you the bill?
I have no way to verify that at this point, Commissioner, so I'm sorry I wouldn't be able to process that.
I could know for next time.
But no, you're right. It could, but there are trees on the right-of-ways that, unless we're getting the call or it's very blatant to the eye, but I think we could work within a specified amount where the commissioners say, here's what you have to do this maintenance, and barring the hurricanes and other things we get, we would work within that amount.
But also, I think, Kevin, just to underscore your point, when the township decides to make decisions and take on responsibilities, there's a cost associated with that. So I think what we've been trying to do now, and I think what the board has asked for, when you make those decisions, there's an associated cost of what is that cost when we assume responsibilities for certain things, because it is very expensive.
And Bob, you guys have done a very good job on improving many things here in terms of the decision making, in terms of bringing the full picture of fully allocated costs to the table. Don't interpret my comment in that way. When I look at somebody say proactive maintenance and knowing how much it costs to maintain trees on my little piece of property, it seems like it's a big bill.
No,
proactive maintenance within the budget.
No, we completely understand that, and
Absolutely.
I will send you a letter of thanks for taking care of those trees for us.
Send them a citation. I don't think it's
Any other
illegal. I don't think
commissioner
it's
comment?
legal.
Any other commissioner comment? Any public comment? All right, the next item on the agenda is the presentation of the South Wayne Stormwater Culvert, July 2012 report.
This is one that I asked Steve to briefly go over with the board. It really recognizes the work of the Public Works staff of what they've done as they continue to keep going and looking at these different areas. And I thought it's a good opportunity here briefly to let the board know of what's been found and some of the interesting things that they came across that I think helps us in the long term as part of that stormwater management plan, so we fully
Can
understand.
I ask you a clarifying question, Bob?
Sure.
I got the materials that were sent to us in a binder. Is the binder an update, or are they the one and the same?
The binder is actually the full report the men did.
Okay.
And women, and the sidebar is actually this slideshow presentation, which is part and parcel of that. In 2011, Chagrin Valley Engineers did the stormwater management study for Radnor Township, and one of the things they noted was that someone should try to ascertain the condition of the stormwater culvert that runs through South Wayne. And although the culvert's not owned by the township, we thought it prudent to try to review it as best we can. And a lot of times you would do this through televising companies, would come in with robotic TVs and go through. But we really didn't know what we were going to find, and it's very costly. So I went to Mark Dominic, who runs our sewer crew, and he said, there's no problem. Our guys are well up to the challenge. So I have to throw kudos to Steve Amarant, J.T. McGuire, Rob DiNicola, Peggy Hagan. The first three folks are the ones that actually went through the culvert, and Peggy helped them compile this report and this slideshow. And the Radnor Haverford Marple Sewer Authority also helped. And really what we're going to do is just step through very quickly. I think it's going to be very eye-opening when you take a look at it. So the first look is the culvert from South Wayne Avenue to Luella through the middle school. And I think the biggest item here is you'll notice that there are literally dozens of pipes that intrude into the culvert, through the culvert, over, under, and around. And that's what these pictures are saying. So you see picture number 3, it's a 12-inch terracotta pipe. It's 25% full. When we inspect pipes, we use the clock. So if a pipe is at 3 o'clock, it's at 90 degrees from center. And that's why you'll see all the references to time. So we're still in the culvert, and if you look, there's pipes that stick out. You'll see that the culvert, look how it's changed in size. Picture 8 shows how it's neck down. And if you keep going, now look at it. So let's go back here to picture 8. There's the culvert, and you can see it's about 3 feet by 4 feet. And they were actually unable to go through that. Number one, it was too hard to get through, and there wasn't enough access from an air standpoint. So you look at picture 8, and now come to look at these two pictures. There's a great example of a arch culvert, number 1. And then under St. Catherine's, you'll see number 2, where we have concrete walls, and it's much more of a rectangular shape. So we have all these odd, I won't say odd, but different shapes of the culvert as it heads down the road. And you'll note that it says not inspected due to hazardous conditions. Again, although we have confined space entry ability, we do not have air packs. So when there's no ability for them to have an escape route with the manhole, and it's that long, they can't go down there. So that's what that item means. You'll look at picture number 3, and what they're saying is there's about 5 inches of debris in the culvert. And in your report, it talks about the general condition of the culvert, and it always has water going through it. Again, just look at all the pipes that come into this. We don't even know what they are. 6-inch terracotta pipe, 6-inch terracotta pipe, 2-inch cast iron, another 6-inch terracotta. It's just amazing. Now, so as everywhere they're walking, they're just finding pipes. And the culvert's in reasonably good shape, except where the pipe intrusions are. As you can see, that's where most of the work needs to be done. If you look at picture 11, I mean, look how that pipe comes in. The mortar and stone's all missing. I think picture 14 is great. Somebody did something to the top of the culvert and put plywood and boards up to hold the patch and left that there. So from a stormwater standpoint, although it's not blocked, all these little different intrusions and cross pipes do affect how stormwater flows through there. let's look at picture 17. There's two pipes that just right on through. 16, the same thing. And there's that nice brace. Picture 21, that's just a manhole. We don't know what the manhole is, but it's covered over. Picture 20, that's reinforcing steel that goes from ceiling to floor. We don't know what that is, why that's there. But again, that's something that can trap debris. But it's reasonably clean for all these different items. Somebody took the time to actually cap some pipes that go in there, 15-inch terracotta. There's a very, very rusty pipe with a plug. Now the next look is between Luella and South Aberdeen. Again, really just an overview, just showing all the different pipes. There's old steam pipes. Many of these pipes, we don't know what they are. We've ascertained, we believe some of them are water, some of them are sewer, some of them are old abandoned steam pipes, some we don't know what they are. Again, if you look at picture number 8, you can see the intrusion, and you can see that's where the damage is done. The culvert in and of itself is in reasonably good shape, but where the pipes went through and the repairs were not up to par, that's where the issues are starting. Again, pipes that just stick out. There's one of our guys sideways in 11. And there he's showing an 8-inch cast iron pipe straight through the culvert. Again, just literally, this is not all of it. As you can see, there's just pipe after pipe. 2-inch galvanized straight through. There's another
Steve,
1-inch.
can you educate me for a minute?
Yes, sir.
Picture 18, because there's been a few of these.
Yes.
Did they build that over the pipe, or is that settling?
No, what they would have done is the culvert would have been installed and somebody drilled through the culvert and put that pipe through. That's what, I mean, I'm not saying that some of these older pipes weren't incorporated as they built the culvert, but a lot of these look like somebody needed to get a pipe from point A to B in a straight line, and that straight line was through the culvert, and that's where they put it.
Can you go back to, I'm not
Yes, sir.
talking, I'm not talking about the steel pipe, I'm talking about the terracotta pipe on 18.
It looks like the brickwork has come down and
That's
blocked.
right. Is that the brickwork settling, or did something else go on?
I would assume from the picture, the brickwork deteriorated because of that pipe intrusion. So somebody literally broke a hole through there and slid a pipe in, and when they patch that patch doesn't have the same integrity as the rest of the culvert. Again, more of the same. I think picture 21 is very interesting. Not only is there a 4-inch cast iron pipe that goes through, there's a 1-inch copper water pipe that goes right on top of it. They got double for their money. And the same thing happens on 24. It's another 2 pipes. And this just continues on and on. But there's a couple things here really to take away from this. The culvert is not consistent in size or shape or even material. There is a layer of sediment on the bottom in most cases. There are some areas of debris where bricks or stone have fallen out of the wall near those pipe intrusions. There's water always flowing through it. Again, more pipe either going straight through it or just intruding. Similar. And that's there's a newer pipe in number 50, 24-inch terracotta. I won't say newer, but it's one of the better shaped pipes. Number 49 is just termed opening because we don't know what that is, but there's a stone, a very small culvert, if you will, that's going into the culvert itself. More of the same. There's a grate. We're getting down by St. Catharines at that point. Now, from St. Catharines at the Grotto through Aberdeen, the rest of the culvert goes down towards Pembroke. They did not go in there because of the same situation they had earlier. Although they could physically walk through there, there's very limited openings. Even with the harness and the rope, we didn't feel it was safe for them to go all the way through there without some air or some ability to exit. So we're coming down near the end, and there's the Aberdeen Avenue Bridge. Again, more pipe. One of the things they noted in the report, it didn't seem like the pipes that crossed through were leaking. They were of reasonable integrity. We don't know how many of them are even active. But I I think the sewer department and Peggy and RHM and Mark Dominic's whole group there did a bang-up job on this, just to give us an idea, roughly speaking, of what that culvert looks like.
Steve, can I ask you about the interaction between the sewer and the storm culverts? Because I recall on Midland, they were having a real problem with their storm water coming into their sewers and then it was backing up into their homes. Did that come from this culvert?
I don't know that it came from the culvert, but the homes on Midland, they're beautiful older homes, and many of them have terracotta laterals, which over time, those laterals have root intrusion or are cracked. So when we get a big storm, you know, you all heard the term inflow and infiltration. So there's a lot of infiltration going in on those laterals, and our sewer lines, to be truthful. Our sewer lines have that also. Whether it's happening in the culvert or just in the ground, I couldn't split the two, but
So it's not water coming from leaking out of the culvert and washing through.
The problem is when there's a heavy storm and the culvert is full, the water coming from all these pipes and all trying to get into the culvert can't get into the culvert, and it backs up. The culvert is not overflowing into the houses. But when the culvert is loaded, there's no place for all that water coming, because see, the culvert's on the other side of the street. They don't get backflow. The backflow is across the street and on these properties here where we've had the problem. And that's because the water coming off Lancaster Pike and everywhere else, and pipes and all, they can't, it's so powerful, they can't discharge there, so that's all backing up, and then it just causes problems
So if
wherever
you
they have broken
improved
pipes.
the flow of the culvert, more of the lateral pipes coming in? Yes.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, part of it is,
Sewage backup is not anything to do with stormwater.
Yeah, no,
However, when you have inflows from rooftops going into sanitary sewer, the water flow in the sanitary sewer increases during a storm. So we
Yeah.
have an issue still, I believe, where there are illegal connections from homes where their downspouts are tying into the sewage system. Because during a storm normally, and Steve, I'm sure you want to speak
it's
to this,
also
but
the
normally
sewage
there's
system.
not inflow. There may be infiltration and inflow, but it's not something you want, so.
Yeah, you get the infiltration into the sewer also, and then you can't discharge into your sewer, and that backs up.
I mean, it's the condition of the pipe, it's the illegal connections, it can be floor drains, it can be sump pumps, it can be rooftop drains, it can be water that's gotten into our main, and reality of it is, when those houses were experiencing backups, in some fashion, rainwater got into the sanitary sewer system, overloaded that, and that's what backed up into their houses.
And Steve, probably most of those pipes that you just showed us that are coming into the culvert are probably illegal connections of some sort. There's very little likelihood that those small
That
pipes
anybody
are coming
permitted
from a
anything.
stormwater system, yeah.
I concur.
Okay. And then the next question I had is there any reason to believe that there's some wacky hydraulics here in that we have big pipes, small pipe, big pipe, such that, I mean, that's what some of the pipes were very large and some were very small, so such that those small segments of small diameter pipe are essentially backing up the whole system, and that this would be one where there could be tremendous cost benefit, meaning that you replace a small segment of pipe and you get the efficiency of the entire run.
Right, I mean, we went from a brick arch culvert to a rectangular culvert under St. Catherine's, and then there's pictures of a 3x4, and by no way do they all share the same cross-sectional area, to convey stormwater. As you go further down the run, that should either be the same or that cross-sectional area should be getting larger and larger and larger, and we don't have that. We have a very inconsistent cross-section going through there.
So, and a little bit backwards, there are areas where downstream it gets smaller than the upstream portion of it.
That's correct.
And one more thing, can you explain how the Midland culvert hooks up, or if it does, to the middle school stormwater?
Well, what the sewer crew did was start on South Lane and came all the way down. I don't know
Picture right here.
for sure how the stormwater management system at the middle school connects to that culvert. That I don't
So-
have that information.
Okay.
Or,
If it didn't connect to there, where would it connect? I mean,
It does
there's,
connect to here.
I would assume, and again, I hate to make an assumption, but you somewhere along the line, one of those dozens and dozens of pipes, it's a very good possibility that there is a
comes
connection through
from the
there.
new system.
Well, we paid $2.2 million to put it in. We ought to know where it hits the system.
I can get that. I can determine that for you, Commissioner.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's, yeah, and the problem is, I mean, the problem that we have is that, I mean, the other day I came to the Township building after a heavy storm, and there was just this much room under the culvert. The water was flowing, but there was just a little bit of room. Now, when when the rain stops, eventually it goes down. But the problem is, when we get those 2 or 3 inches in an hour or two, we just can't handle it, and we're never going to be able to handle it.
Well,
I mean, we used to get that once every 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, 15 years. Now we get it like every year or twice a year sometimes,
the report from 2011 noted, especially out here at Ivan Avenue at our entrance, that these culverts are woefully undersized, as are many throughout the township. So you have an open stream bed that's getting channeled through an undersized culvert.
Yeah.
And
Well, we had one of the proposals was to open all these culverts. It was $2 million, $500,000 a culvert to do them, and we decided to spend that $2 million at the Township building because we said we get more bang for our bucks. We probably should have opened all those culverts and kept the water flowing better. But I watch television like everybody else, and all over the United States, when they get this thing, you get 2 or 3 inches. I mean, it's flooded. I mean, it's just. I mean, it's changed. I mean, we can spend millions of dollars and lessen the impact, but when we get if we get one of those cells over us, we get 2 or 3 inches, it drops it. There's just nothing you can do. I mean, it's just horrendous.
Maybe if I could just add to, I think Commissioner Fisher, there's currently being a design is being developed right now for the Midland Avenue sanitary sewer. So I believe that one should be coming close to being brought to the board here for actually being put out to bid. That was one of the projects this year. But also I think trying to get into that culvert east of Aberdeen, since that is enclosed between the homes on Midland and St. David's, to actually find out what's going on in there too, because most of those trees have to be probably 30, 40, 50 years old, and I'm sure those roots have penetrated into that system. So I think Steve talked about the safety concern of trying to get a firm in there to actually videotape and see what's going on within that system too as well. So I think it goes back to Bill, your point there too. If there's some restrictions that are within there, that may be holding back the water too. But that's something we're going to have to look at as well.
Any other commissioner comment, questions? Public comment? All right, the next item we have is 2013 budget discussions, special meetings, dates, recommendations, summary of findings.
You ready? Come on, Jeff. There we go. All right. What we wanted to do is just kind of review here of where we've been at and the different meetings that have taken place. January 3rd went through the kick off the discussions for the budget plan, which the schedule was approved. On January 18th, we talked about stormwater quality management plan. On the 30th, reviewed the capital equipment replacement and funding plan, as well as CARFAC, the discussion and presentation of the initial 5-year forecast. In February, there was discussions regarding pensions and OPEB. On the 19th, we discussed township services and staffing. April 30th, there was a recap and discussion of the previous meetings to date. On the 24th of May, discussed township facilities and infrastructure. And July 18th was the funding for the various groups and organizations and funding for the fire companies, and brings us here this evening to August 13th. So there's been a lot of work by the board, a lot of time put in to kind of review a lot of the information that has been put forth to the board, helping to make decisions in the long term. And I think this goes back to what Commissioner Nagel was talking about, putting long-term plans in effect and to be able to follow that. So I want to thank the board for spending the time on these different meetings and the input and feedback that we received, not only from the residents, but from businesses as well as part of this plan here. And with that, I know Bill has put a lot together here, so I'll let Bill review kind of from his area on some of these particular items on the financial side, and then we'll look for some feedback from the board.
All right, as by way of just catching us up to where we're at tonight, as Mr. Zinkowski mentioned, we discussed the departmental capital equipment back on January 30th, provided the board and the public with an update on what that plan would look like. The summaries from that was presented back at the end of April are still as they were. They're still in the forecast today as they were presented back at the end of April, so there's no update there. The information on this slide is consistent with what was presented back at the end of April at the last update. The OPEB pension and compensated leave balance, we presented that initially on February 21st. At the end of April meeting, the update, we had some updated pension numbers, but since that time, there have been a couple updates on OPEB and compensated absences. Specific to OPEB, we have received the most recent actuary update, which is dated January 1st, 2012. So you'll see, and I'll highlight the changes that occurred in the numbers since that time. But a couple important observations still, as was reported on April 30th, the impact that OPEB has on the township's net assets as of December 31st of 11 was the unfunded liability growing from 9.5 to 12.6 million. And you'll see, I'll highlight in a moment the UAAL, which is the unfunded actuarial accrued liability, and the ARC, which is the annual required contribution. Those amounts changed as a result of, as part of the actuary process and working with members of CARFAC, determining that some of the assumptions that were used in the past weren't accurate, and so updating those. And actually, those assumption changes worked to the benefit of the township, or the benefit to lower the liability. At the same time, the CARFAC has been working on a project that started primarily in June. The working group of the CARFAC has met approximately 6 times with the township's labor attorney, as well as Mock and Hop, who serve as the township's actuary firm, as well as the administration, to put together a report that will eventually come to the board that'll highlight the overall situation as it relates to OPEB and pension, outline some of the major trigger points of things that we can and cannot do by law, and then give some recommendations to the board. So that's ongoing as well. That report's actually in draft form, and we're working on some of the final assumptions and recommendations now.
Bill, before you move on,
Yes, sir.
If one of the recommendations is changing from a defined benefits to defined contribution, articles I've read suggest that actually can have a significant cost up front because you no longer have the funding base for your defined benefit program. So make sure that that kind of information is included too.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. To update the numbers and how it is impacting the forecast as it exists today, this is a comparison of the table that was presented back on April 30th versus where we are at today. It's a little bit difficult to see live. Hopefully the colors come through a little bit better on the screens. That the numbers that are highlighted in blue are the ones that changed. Specifically on the updated table, which is the bottom one, you'll see that the compensated absence unfunded liability dropped by roughly 1.8 million. The reason for that drop was the action that the board took in allocating general fund balance toward addressing that liability. So there is a significant portion of that liability that is indeed now funded. So this is just the unfunded portion of it. You'll see the annual contribution estimates for the compensated absence dropping from 537,000 and some change down to 269,000 and some change. The difference there being since we last met, we've had a couple retirements where those liabilities were paid out, which is, so the liability has been satisfied. So in estimating the impact on future years' forecast, we reduced what that amount is for those 2 individuals that retired. With the OPEB numbers, you'll see that it dropped by roughly a little over $2 million. Again, those go back to, that's the impact of a couple of the assumptions that were used in the past that were not accurate, that actually overstated the amount of the liability. And then when you look at the annual required contribution of little less than $4.6 million, you'll see that that dropped from 5.2. And again, that's the actuarial calculation into an annual number on the changes of those assumptions. And those are, that entire liability and obligation is highlighted in the actuarial report that's dated January 1st, 2012. Moving on, the staffing requirements was then, we discussed that on March 19th. The numbers that were presented at the last update are consistent today as they were then. So this slide here is, the numbers here are consistent with what was reported back at the end of April. We had assumed the addition of 2 police officers for 13, another 2 for 14, and then 1 more in 15. And I think that brought the total number of uniformed officers to 45. And as well as 2 code or community development positions, as well as eliminating other positions that had been previously included in the budget. Since the last update at the May 24th meeting that was held at the Public Works Garage, the township, we presented a long list of township facility funding needs. If you go back to that presentation, the information was broken out into needs that were from 0 to 5 years, then from 5 to 10 years, and then beyond 10 years. So for the purpose of trying to forecast what that might look at for anything that was within the 0 to 5 years, it was assumed that those would be taken care of through some sort of financing mechanism. Any of the repairs or improvements needed from 5 to 10 years, it was assumed that monies would be set aside on an annual basis, and then cash would be used at some future date when the improvement was made, as well as the beyond 10 years. So, and again, those are pretty.
When you say financing mechanism, you're talking about borrowing money to do this?
Yes, yeah, or yes, primarily. And that, again, it's trying to annualize the impact versus show. I think the total for facilities that was reported that night was a little over $6.7 million. So rather than show $6.7 million in 2013's forecast, trying to spread that out over the 5-year period. Obviously, there's a lot of moving pieces to that and a lot of decisions that will be made with regard to what facilities that are even on there and whether or not those be township obligations or if those could be shared or worked out through other opportunities. So at this point, basically, we took the numbers that were presented back in May and spread those out either through some sort of financing or cash set aside. With regard to infrastructure funding that was also discussed that night, as it turns out, the items that were identified as sanitary sewer fit within the amounts that we had already built into the sanitary sewer fund for the entire forecast period. So as a result, those improvements are included in what was already forecasted, so there's no need to further change the forecast to include those. Stormwater, being that it's kind of its own entity right now, it's on its own set of tracks with regard to the engineering study, as well as the amount of projects or dollars that are out there. The $47 million that was reported back in May. At this point, the forecast does not include any revenue or expenses to address those items. Instead, we'll see what the engineering report comes back with on how those are going to be addressed moving forward. The last piece of the infrastructure was a traffic signals, which the township is responsible for maintaining. We had included in there in that presentation of $195,000 needed in years 0 through 5. Rather than trying to spread that out, I included the full amount in 13, as well as there was $97,000 amount for 14. I put the entire amount in for 14. Those obviously by project can be prioritized and spread out, but for purposes of just taking a look at the numbers, that's how they're treated in the forecast update. One other item I want to touch on just real briefly is there's still some updates needed to the forecast that we're working on
it was recommended, and I think it's an excellent recommendation at the April meeting, that we reincorporate the three different revenue outcomes into the forecast, which included the optimistic, normal, and pessimistic revenue assumptions. So I'm working on reincorporating those. Right now, for the numbers that we'll look at momentarily, it assumes normal growth as it did back at the end of April. We're also working off of several different worksheets hopefully this will make more sense here in a moment when I talk about what we're going through to develop the 2013 budget, but there are two different worksheets that right now don't talk to one another. So I've got to get that so that as we make amendments to the 2013 budget, as we work through that process, the forecast is automatically updated as well. And a good example of that might be what we were discussing tonight with regard to the trees and the maintenance required with the trees, that if it's decided during the 2013 budget process that we want to incorporate the tree program or some variation of it, that as we plug that in for 13, that the forecast is updated for the next 5 and 15 years to incorporate that program, so we can see not just 13s, but on a long-term basis how that'll impact our funding needs. Finally, with regard to the community organization funding, we had the special meeting on July 18th. The community organizations came and did a really good job of spelling out their operations and what they were looking for. I don't have those numbers in yet because I need to go back with and re-engage with those organizations and make sure that the assumptions that I wrote down during that meeting were consistent with what their intentions were during their presentations. So for now, the community organizations numbers are only as they exist today with the growth. I have not incorporated any of the changes that they asked for that night into here yet. I want to make sure those are right. I don't want to build something in there and then have someone come at some later date and say that I misunderstood. So I just want to make sure that it's all crystal clear before it gets rolled out here. Excuse me. So looking at some of the updated projections, we have, if you'll recall, we're building this off of, we have a base set of revenue and expenditures, and then we are working on, as we've had each of these meetings throughout the year, we have been building upon the base in terms of revenues and expenditures. Although most of the meetings that we've had to date have been focused on the expenditure side, we've also been working on several revenue-related revenue-generating options as well. So that's the differences you see here. You quickly look, and obviously the modified expenditures are higher than the modified revenues at this point. And as you go out over time, that number grows. The one thing that, and I'll touch on this, and it may be a little bit clearer momentarily, that the slope of the lines is consistent, which may be good news. I'll let you decide for sure.
It's not when the base is bigger.
What's that?
Not when the base is bigger, because the same % increase on the expenditures is going to be bigger than the increase on the revenues.
Well,
1% of
Yes, sir.
$40 million
Yes, sir.
is less
Yeah,
than 1% of $44 million.
yes. The updated projections, as we talked about, this graph is basically the same as it was presented back at the end of April. The difference being is that we now have facility funding and infrastructure on top of it. So this is just a look at, as we've discussed each of these items during these special meetings, this is the amount of additional expenditure that's been added to the forecast in each of those years. And you can see what level of impact each of those items are having. And as we've discussed all along, the OPEB is the primary increase, as well as the staffing modifications. As a result, when we take a look at the net revenues over or under the expenditures for each of the forecasted years, there is a deficit situation, which means that we're short on revenues to meet those expenses as forecasted. And you can see the difference between what is considered the base, which is today's operations just forecasted out, versus the modified, which includes all the discussions we've had to date.
So, Bill, is that base, the gray, the darker gray base versus base, and the lighter gray modified versus modified?
It is, yes, sir. It's it's base revenues less base expenditures, and modified revenues less modified expenditures. So one of the other items that was built into the forecasting model was that we've been looking at as we've stepped through this process is the implied percentage real estate millage change. So not surprisingly, the modified implied change is the highest bar on that graph. And again, when you look at it, it's obvious that some sort of adjustment, all other things being equal, some sort of adjustment is needed. But then the other piece of this appears to be that after that adjustment is made, things level out in terms of funding requirements with not a whole lot of fluctuation year over year in the percentage that the math is calculating. So we take those percentages and we apply it to where the township is at today in terms of millage rates, and you could see what those millage rates would be over time, or they would mathematically need to be over time to meet those expenditure numbers. And again, appears to be some sort of one-time adjustment followed by years of minor ups and downs in terms of what is needed. So that's where I was saying you can be the judge of the back half of it. It appears that over time, with the staffing reductions that the township has done, the increases on the non-tax related revenues in recovering costs for services, the professional services that the township is doing a better job of in recovering with development agreements, those types of adjustments are showing on here in that once the structural issue is resolved, the ongoing operational piece appears to be a lot closer in line than what at least I initially thought. But I don't want to underscore the fact that some adjustment looks like is necessary or would be necessary to meet that. And I'm sorry, my throat's dry up. So the 2013 internal budget process, switching gears a little bit, I wanted to talk briefly or demonstrate to the board what we're doing internally as we develop the 2013 budget internally. We met on Friday as each of the departments, we stepped through what is going to be required of them as we develop the 2013 budget. You'll see there's two different categories on this chart, the top being the finance department and what we're working on, and at the same time below the departmental task list and the different things that they've been asked to do and the time period that they have to put it together. So this is just to show all the different moving pieces. Each of these tasks includes its own list of smaller items that need to be worked on and checked off the list. But this is what's going on basically from now until you see the budget, which we currently have slated for October 15th. One other update that we presented back in April.
Is there any way to accelerate that, Bill? The only reason is October 15th would put us between the first and second meeting in October. So if we can get it, I don't know what the date of the meeting in October is, but if we can get it before that, where are you?
One of the other, it might be possible internally. To be perfectly honest, I think it would be difficult because departments have to basically have it in less than a month.
Is there any, Bob, if you could talk with John Rice, if we could maybe get a preview copy without violating the Sunshine Act or any of that stuff, that might be helpful. I mean, you go back to that chart, then the percent increases you're offering up on a preliminary basis are really not something I'm going to find palatable. So I want to understand the raw numbers as soon as I can.
And I think that's part of it, is part of the schedule here that, I think we've been working on this, and internally we've had different budget planning sessions to help get to a point here. But now when we get going this Wednesday, all staff is being engaged in the process here of developing this, to try to put a plan together that'll come to the board that, one that everybody should be able to follow. Again, there's a lot of moving pieces to this, and trying to put something together that's not only the 13, but a 5, a 10, and 15 is part of this that follows. There's a lot of moving pieces, not to say we can't get it to you sooner, but also as part of this is getting the involvement of CARFAC in this as well, to have their review, their input as part of this, and trying to get their times together and be able to put something together that has a lot of narrative, a lot of backup, so when this comes to the board. But as soon as we have something to you, we can get something to you as an overview. And I think tonight that's some of the things we're going to be looking for the board is some of your priorities, that you're looking for, what you want to see, what you don't want to see, so that, again, we don't go through this whole process here and present something to you and the board says, look, we aren't even looking at that, or that's not an issue, or staffing, can we delay that, put those off? So there's a lot of parts to this, but, as soon as we can have something to you, if it's looking at the overall budget as a draft type situation, is that kind of what you're looking for, Kevin, as part of that?
If you can just go back a couple of slides, Bill. You know the one I'm looking at, the one that had the percentages on it, the one that said something like 40% increase. I think is, yeah.
I would find that hard to believe that we're going to come to you with
right.
with
But even a 10 is going to be pretty tough. I mean, my position is pretty clear. I also think you guys have landed on a very nice suggestion for dealing with sort of the residual effect of years and years of not addressing issues, which is to take some of these development plans that provide us with monies beyond what we usually get, and use that as a vehicle for bringing down this OPEB liability when we get those sort of extra amounts of cash. I just again, my gut reaction is in an environment of the economy we're in, to go out with anything above a CPI increase is going to be awfully difficult to deal with. But that's my opinion.
Can I just comment? This percentage increase takes in a lot of assumptions that we've all kind of bought into as we've done this year. So, when we look at OPEB, we look at the pension, unfunded liabilities in terms of OPEB and pension. The only thing I would suggest is, rather than having a very large increase in taxes, having an increase in taxes that, when compounded over the next, say, having the same increase every year over year, and compounding it over, say, a 10-year term or maybe a 15-year term, we get to the same place. We just don't get there so abruptly. But we also have to, and to highlight, to also speak to what Kevin just said, if at any point we come into found money, whether that's, we discover an unpaid tax liability or any type of settlement like that money is used to pay down the long-term liabilities like OPEB and the pension and capital expenditures. But what I would like to see, if you haven't already done it, is if there is some efficient frontier where we come up with a rate that, when compounded year over year for, say, 10 years, that we get to about the same place, fully understanding that we're not meeting the full funding obligation that we'd like to, but we eventually, through the compounding, we get there.
Right, and you bring up a really good point, and it bears repeating, as we discussed back in April and actually back in January, where we first started looking at the forecast and first started taking a look at these percentages, is these assume that on January 1st, 2013, we throw the fix everything switch with regard to just about everything except for stormwater, which I think we recognized then and would tonight as being somewhat unrealistic. That this would be, if we wanted to fully fund OPEB starting January 13, we'd go at it with this kind of adjustment. And we've said even at the OPEB meeting that that's not realistic, because over time there will be amendments and changes to how the assumptions, the benefit levels, how those are actuarially calculated. If you go at a full fix right now and you start amending those assumptions, then at that point you're actually overfunding it. So there's there's going to be some time and a lot more analysis needed. So hopefully everyone is able to keep that in mind when they look at this, that, again, this throws the fix everything switch on January 1st of 13, which is not something that I think was being recommended.
I want to commend you on doing this way, because until you see this, you don't change your behavior. So this board, prior boards, if prior boards had this type of information, I think would have made different decisions over the years. And I think it's helpful to see it the way it is. And then we have to make tough decisions. And we maybe don't spend money where we want to spend money, where we have a choice. But
And that's something, just to add to Bill's point too, so the emails don't start coming in tomorrow that we're looking at 38%, tax increase, because we're not. It's just, I think what wanted to do is for the issue of putting full disclosure, I guess, that this is everything all in, and even looking at all the different groups and organizations to what their concerns are, so that I think as we look to propose to the board, but the board is aware that there are all these issues that sit out there. How are we going to address these? And put a plan in place that, whether from administrative side or a board side, that there's actually a plan that has to, and what it is change and modify, so that if there is increased revenues that come in, and I think the board did that with putting in place that if there were excess, revenues at the end of the year, bottom line, there was a net surplus, that right away the board decided that we're going to send these in directions to fund capital equipment, to start paying cash for those items, and to start addressing a lot of these liabilities. So I think what the board has done, which I think has been a great aspect, to be able to start addressing that there are these concerns out there, and if there is a surplus, that we're going to address those and not say, well, we've got extra money, so let's go do this or do that, to actually addressing that we have these liabilities. So I think the board should know all these things, that it's all out there, and that helps give you some confidence in decisions you're going to have to make, or direction back to us of what things need to change.
I have a couple of questions. Nothing that we've discussed tonight considers any impact on labor contracts, correct? Improvements to the contracts?
That's correct.
So, my sense is that we need to get significant improvement in the contracts from our perspective. I recognize that, it's a process, but that it's hard for us to go to the taxpayers and say, we need this amount of tax increase, unless we say we've also done everything that we can to improve the contracts as much as possible. So for me, I'm looking at no staffing increases until we are comfortable with the quality of the contracts. No big projects, so we can't fund a lot of these things that are necessary but very sizable. The sensitive item to me is the contracts, and then once we've identified what's in the contracts, then we start fitting the pieces together to determine what's the appropriate level of taxes that we would need to ask the citizens to pay.
Any other commissioner comment?
Can I just, there's something I jumped out as I'm looking at it, so I just want to prepare you for it. When they come to the Board of Commissioners regular meeting for the MMO resolution, are you going to have a sensitivity that tells me what it would be versus, I think they're using an assumed 7 to 8% return on investment versus a 4% return on investment?
I'm sorry, what are we talking about exactly?
It's totally not related to what Don just discussed, but I'm looking at the September 24th meeting.
Oh, the municipal obligation for the pension?
Correct.
Okay.
That's all driven by an assumed return on investment for the pensions.
Yes.
Which, in my opinion, is overly ambitious. Because they were 7 or 8% is my recollection.
We went from 8, and the new actuarial assumption is 7.5.
Which I don't know too many people getting a return on investment of 7.5% now. And if they can tell me where to go, I'd appreciate knowing that fact. So I'd just be interested in knowing what that would have been if it was a more realistic assumption of something like 4%.
Yes, we will absolutely put that together.
All right, I didn't want to blindside you
But
that
Kevin-
night because you need that number in ahead of time.
Kevin, I have a question, though. The actuarial assumptions are based on long-term performance, not year-to-year performance. So I'd like to understand their basis of how they came up with the 7.5.
Yeah, because somebody in my ward sent me some information saying that municipalities are moving away from 7.5, and are moving to much more conservative numbers. So, I mean, similar to what John's saying, I don't know what the number is, but we need to know what is the norm, because increasingly what I'm seeing is that 7.5 is not the norm, or at least that's what's been communicated to me.
But at our pension meetings, I mean, we're getting a good rate of return up near that, right?
We've had quarters where we've reached that, but then there's
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
very next quarter, it's been 0 or 1 or 2%. It's nothing that's consistent or.
Yeah.
But on historically on the long term,
Yeah.
on the pension, I think our pension has done, 5-6%
Yeah,
in the last 10.
the problem is that, as we discussed back in February, each year you don't hit that mark, the problem compounds into the next year, where not only do you need to make up the losses from the prior period, but you need to earn that 7.5%. So we'll show it to you. There's a sensitivity analysis that needs to be done, and why I think we'll find that municipalities move slowly in a direction, because we'll see that a quick movement from, say, 7.5 down to 4 is going to cause the MMO
Understood.
to go so high that.
But we're naively thinking we're solving a problem if we have a false assumption on that return of investment.
I don't disagree, but I think not too dissimilar from OPEB, thinking that solving it on January 1st, 2013, I think everyone's going to have a hard time
I
with
just
that
want to
number as
understand
well.
the issue.
Yes,
I don't expect to solve it that night. But I also wanted you to be prepared so that you could ask them with sufficient lead time so that they come with that answer, or you come with that answer, because I didn't want to, get my package the couple of days before, ask you for it, and then not have you have the time to get it. I'm telling you 6 weeks in advance that that's something I'm going to want that night.
I appreciate it. Thank you. And going back to your initial point on the schedule, is we wanted to be sure that CARFAC was involved at every step of the process, and it's not to inundate them with several meetings throughout the period. We've built the schedule around their ability to meet, which is why we ended up at October 15th.
If you gave me what you give to them, I'd be happy,
Okay.
Because, what you're saying to me here, if I understand it correctly, is, I don't know what your timing for delivering it to them, but on
It's
October
October
10th, they're going to have a recommendation back to me. I assume they're going to see it before then.
Our intention is to step through what is going to be recommended to the board with them on the 10th.
Okay.
Well, let me ask a question. Originally, in the year-long calendar that we had for all of these meetings, these special meetings, we had on it August, at some point in August, CARFAC was going to give some recommendations to the board regarding 2013 budget specifically. Is there going to be any kind of process like that, or is that pushed back a little bit?
Yeah, it won't be August, but with regard to the pension and OPEB project, they're in the process of finalizing the recommendations on that. When we get together on the 23rd, the intention is to put together various items that they want to see, and they will assign out to their different working groups with the intention then on September 19th, they come back together and have something in terms of recommendations. I think, though, from their perspective, and maybe this is something we'll want to communicate with them, is what the board's expectations of them are as well.
Well, for me personally, I would really like their input on some of these issues, on how much we should be funding OPEB year to year, starting next year, on if we don't fund it fully, which we're not going to, so if we don't, what we should be thinking as Plan B. On some of even the staffing issues, I'd like to hear, on a lot of these issues, I'd like to hear their opinion. Mid-September would be great timing if that works for them.
Okay.
But, they've spent a lot of time this year thinking through these issues. I think their opinion, while we're putting the budget together, would be really valuable. as opposed to after the budget's put together and kind of opining about, yeah, thumbs up or thumbs down.
Well, to your point, that's why the budget calendar was put together with them in mind.
Okay.
It was built around their ability to meet on those dates, which is what we worked with CARFAC on July 19th on putting this together and outlining it around their ability to meet during August, September, and October. So,
another question I had about the calendar. This does not include our regular December 3rd Board of Commissioners meeting? At least mine didn't. So are we still having that meeting, or it's just left off here?
yes, it's just
Okay.
from November 26th to December 3rd, it didn't give enough time for the required advertising
not-
for the ordinance. So it would be a regular meeting, it's
Other
just
than
not
budget.
on the budget calendar.
Okay. All right. Are you taking comments on our thoughts of parameters at this point?
I have one. Can you go back to that slide for a second, Bill? Bob, how do you envision these priorities that are going to be adopted on September 17th and the budget that's going to be submitted on the 15th of October connecting, or the priorities going to get revised if they're not funded? How do you envision that working out?
Well, I think from the adoption of your priorities, we will incorporate that into the budget. So as the board determines those priorities, we will go back then, if it's different from an administrative recommendation to the board, if your priorities are, here's what you're going to set, we will go back in and then modify what we have as a draft budget is put together to meet what
But
your
at the end of the
priorities
budget being
are.
approved, do you go back and check and make sure they're funded?
If the board has that as a priority, yes.
Okay. I would think that you'd want to, to sit there and set a list of priorities for 2013 and then not come to December, not
Correct.
fund them, doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense.
Correct.
Bill, will the summary of findings that you just gave us, will that be on the website?
Yes.
Okay.
There's on the budget and reporting page of the Finance Department on the website, there's all of these presentations have been put out there for, as the day after they've been presented for people to follow along. So you'll see an
this one
August
will be on tomorrow.
13th presentation, and it'll be a PDF version of the presentation tonight.
Okay.
Sixth, is that next, or we did that?
We just finished that.
Okay,
So, included in the presentation is the update that we like to continue to remind folks just on the breakout of the real estate tax rates and that the taxpayers of Radnor are paying. And included in this, and the pie chart is on the right-hand side is a brief list or a high-level list of the services and community organization funding that comes out of the 12% that comes to the township, as well as disclosing on there the amounts that the township pays to the county for tipping fees and to the school district for use of their facilities and busing that are both relatively new, within the last few years new. So that concludes my portion of the presentation. Thank you.
Any other Board of Commissioner comments? Suggestions, recommendation?
Well, I'll jump in here. I mean, for me, in looking at the 2013 budget, it's really important for me to get a good feel for how we're ending 2012. And I'm assuming at some point we'll get a full year forecast while we're thinking this through, because hopefully this year we'll have a similar situation to last year, where we'll have some money after the 15% set aside that we can funnel to some of these expenses, capital, OPEB, et cetera. And I'm purposefully not calling it surplus or excess, because it makes me crazy to call it that, because then people in the audience hear, oh my gosh, a $3 million surplus or excess $4 million. Why in the world would we raise taxes if there are $4 million surplus? When in reality, that money is spoken for and then some 100 times over. It makes me feel like perhaps we should, some of these things that we are no longer funding with bond money, capital expenses, and then also pension, OPEB, we should be putting them in our budget as line item, because they are. They're going to be every year. We're funding them now with surprise money at the end of the year, but that's not really, it misrepresents what they're real costs that we have every year. And it misrepresents the situation to say we have surplus that we're putting over towards these things. So I hesitate to call it surplus or excess, because that's not what it is. And I would love to see us head towards a scenario where those are line items. Our capital set aside every year, our OPEB set aside, that's in our budget, that we need to balance. We need to set forth goals every year of how much we're going to put in there, and then balance. And then if we have surplus over that, we can decide what to do with it. As far as staffing goes, we need more police officers yesterday. We all know that. So that has to be in our budget. I think it will be. I don't think there's any debate about it. But I also would like to see funding for a part-time arborist, be it a staff member or consultant. It doesn't matter to me, but enough money set aside to have a legitimate commitment on that front in that kind of professional capacity. The community organizations that we've heard from, I believe that I know that those numbers weren't in your forecasts, but they are going to have to be in our budget, and we have the responsibility and the obligation to fund those groups. I see our funding, the modest increase that most of them asked for in the neighborhood of a 2.5% increase in funding. I think that's completely legitimate, and I'd like to see that worked in. As far as some of the more pie-in-the-sky requests we got for capital expenditures, we're having trouble. We can't fund our own capital expenses, so I'm not sure that we can step in and help out the capital needs of our 501c3s. But at the very least, we need to provide a small increase to those groups that they asked for.
If I could, real quickly, just to make sure, and I don't know if I misunderstood, but in the forecast, there is funding for all of those organizations
Right.
at today's level plus 2.5%.
Oh, plus 2.5.
It's not like
misunderstood that.
we took them completely out of the
Okay.
forecast. We just didn't add anything over what they're getting today outside of just a 2.5% increase.
So you
So
put
it's-
in a 2.5% for all of the groups?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what's in the forecast now.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the groups at the meeting asked for dollars over and above
Right.
that. That's the piece, that incremental piece is what's not included in the forecast.
Okay. Well, I misunderstood that,
Okay.
so thank you for clarifying. And some of them, for instance, the fire department, I don't know if that number that they asked for was 2.5%, it was just a number. But, some of those, the fire company and the library particularly, we have the obligation to fund. So, my last comment is I do not see us fully funding the OPEB, $2+ million set aside per year. I just don't think that's realistic. Nobody here thinks that's realistic. So I think we should just kind of it's a nice earmark to see, but let's just take it off the table. It's not going to happen. So I think what we really should spend our time thinking about is what set aside we want, and the shortfall, because we're not going to be able to set it all aside, the shortfall, how are we going to plan to fund that? What are potential sources for funding for that in our future, and identify those and deal with those long-term expenses that way. And that's it.
Just, if I could, real quickly, with regard to where we're at with 2012, as we forecasting those balances heading into the 2013 budget process, those are included in the monthly finance reports. If at any time during a meeting you want me to step through those, I'd be more than happy to do that. Or if there's a way to present that information that's a little bit easier to understand or a little clearer, I'm all ears too, because I know not everyone thinks like I do. So if there's a way to present that information in a clear way, please let me know.
the monthly reports we get are pretty condensed. Do you anticipate or foresee making, doing a more detailed forecast for the end of the year or no?
Well, yeah, what you're seeing is the condensed piece. Behind it is a line-by-line forecast on where we think we're going to end, both on the revenues and expenditures.
Right.
And I could add that to the report.
Well, I mean, for instance, when we finished last year, we got a large budget document that had 2009 to 2011.
Mm-hmm.
Then it had forecast, and it was every line. And then it had forecasted 2011 end, and then it had projected 2012. So that, having that line by line, maybe I'm alone here, but that's very helpful to see the forecast of what you think everything is going to, not just big chunks, but what everything, where we may be making.
I have all that already put together. I wasn't sure anyone really wanted to comb through all that. If you think it'd be helpful, I'd be more than happy to add it to the report.
I think the data is great. Is there any chance, Elaine, you'd be interested in getting this electronically instead of?
Yeah,
Because
sure.
I feel like I'm drowning in papers.
I'll add it as an appendix to the report that I already do. So if you want to print it out, you can. If you don't, if you just
Okay.
want to keep the 3-4 page summary.
That's
Or-
fine.
okay.
Electronically is fine.
Absolutely. Okay,
Yeah,
I will do
and
that.
Bill, for me, if just a picture of you with your thumbs up or thumbs down would be good, as long as the
I'll
data's
just
on the
give you
website.
thumb.
But I think as part of that, we had talked previously about a dashboard.
Yeah.
And basically everyone will be able to follow along with, and the residents could follow along with. I think that's a key component of, so everyone's able to follow. And then there's something in addition to that, if you want more details, you'd be able to go and find that. I think that's why that benefit of the dashboard would be very helpful.
The things I'd be interested in seeing, first of all, Bob, I'd like to see an assessment from you and your department heads about what aren't we doing insofar as the service to the community. I know our people are working really hard, and everybody will always say, oh yeah, hire me one more guy, and that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for, there's routinely we do this thing and we just haven't been able to get around to it, and we get complaints from people. Timeliness of turning permits around, for example. We've recently had that unfortunate incident where there was a lot of confusion, I guess, between us and that contract engineer. So I'd like to see that kind of an assessment. I agree, there's no way in the world we're going for a 37% budget increase. John's suggestion and Elaine's that let's find some reasonable amount and how long it would take to correct the situation. Mentioned before, I'm concerned that as we move forward with labor contracts, that if we do decide to try to flip to a defined benefits, that we understand the cost of that. Stormwater management, I'm sensitive to. I agree we need to do something. I just want to make sure that whatever we do in stormwater management has bang for the buck. Not just cosmetic. In the past, we've done many things that were, in fact, cosmetic. They helped for the quarter-inch rainstorm. And quite frankly, I think there's a certain level that, we can't do anything. And there are people who live in floodplains. That's unfortunate. But I don't think it's incumbent upon all the taxpayers in this township to bail them out. Anyway, this stuff that you've put out tonight is really great, Bill. Thank you. That's all I have.
Anyone else?
I want to just thank all staff for all the presentations tonight. It was very helpful to get that additional information, so thank you all.
Public comment?